Hello again, fellow Bible nerds.
Hello.
Uh, um, I wanted to thank you all for the feedback so far on my first video. We've gotten a lot of questions and feedback already, and I realized through a couple questions we didn't really, or I didn't really post my sources in the last video, so bear with me, I'm new to this. But I do want to just kind of like run through and show you some of the books that I've used as my source material for putting this all together. Obviously, number one,
Really?
pretty good book.
I hope so.
Highly recommend.
Highly
Really
recommend.
good read.
Really good read.
This is the one I quoted the most, and I
Okay,
mis
you gotta show them how thick.
yeah I misquoted the author of this one because I was all over the place. But Frazer is the author of this book,
The Golden
and
Bough by James George Frazer.
believe it or not, this is the abridged version. This is actually a 12 volume series that you can't get for cheaper than $1,200. So dude literally spent his entire life researching that stuff, so it is the brunt of my citing. Inanna,
Queen of Heaven.
Queen of Heaven
I cited that
and
quite a
Earth
bit.
from Diane Wolkstein and Samuel Noah Kramer. This one was also amazing. History's Vanquished Goddess Asherah by Darlene Kosnick. And this book was really good for the iconography because it just like has all of the stelas and the reliefs and lines it all up by name and region and concepts, so it's a really good cross-reference source. The Apocrypha I used quite a bit, but I didn't cite it as there is quite a bit of discussion on whether or not it's
Canon.
biblically accurate or canon. So just to make sure that I was only using sources that everybody trusted, I left that out for the most part. I do cite it once in this video, but it's a
Take it or leave
it's
it.
a take it or leave it. So by no means asserts itself. Book on Norse mythology by Lindo. I didn't use this one a whole lot, but I did get into it a little bit. And I'll probably be using them more in the future as I do more videos. This one was also big. Mesopotamian history is really difficult to get information on because it's so ancient. Most of the information is missing or hidden or deleted. But Stephanie Dalley is the author of this one. And actually, side note, I've actually seen a lot of these stelas. I was in the Louvre on one of my military stations, so I was able to see a lot of these images and icons in person, and I did some time in London. Um, and I'll kind of point out some of the things, some of the parts of their culture kind of stands out a lot more in a different way because these images haven't been hidden over there because they've just been there for so long. So there's less obscuring, and it's enough of a culture difference where I was noticing these symbols and starting to see where they came from. The Nephilim and the Pyramid of Apocalypse. Again, this one I didn't cite. Just has some strange information and some useful information and everything in between. So, um, then this was one of the first books that I read early on. Time is the Ally of Deceit by Richard Reeves. Highly recommend this guy. He does a really, really exhaustive Roman and Greek breakdown.
This one's more my book. This one's, if you've read or if you've watched The Christmas Question, it's a documentary. It's very, very well done documentary about kind of the origins of Christmas. They have the author of this book come on, and I just remember, because we've loved this study, that I was like, I have to get that book. And so we'll get into this a little bit more next video is going to be more our like study on Christmas and those rituals. But this one's called The Krampus and the Old Dark Christmas, and it's called From Al Riddenor. So, and it's got pictures too. It's really, really good read. And then there's two we don't have, and there's also an Egyptian mythology book we'll have to get. Our books are everywhere. So, fun stuff. This one is, you quoted this a lot, the first one. It's The Cult of Asherah
By
by
Judith
Judith
Hadley.
Hadley and The Sacred Tree by Carol M. Cusack. Um, Very good read. It's a Cambridge published. So all of these are academic. Um,
And we got enough of a broad sweeping range that all of them, when you start to see them all say the same thing, having no relationship to each other, you just kind of like circle in on those commonalities and you can branch off from there. This book was given to me by my very good friend Scott, Judah's Scepter and Joseph's Birthright by J.H. Allen. This book was published in like 1920, and I'll be using this a lot for the Greater Exodus portion of this study. It's the opposite end of this spectrum, where all of this is talking about how Satan has gotten the birthright from Adam, from Israel, through deception. And this book is all about the birthright that God passed down through Abraham up to Jesus, or Yeshua, depending on how you say his name, and how that birthright will be reinstituted to his people in the last days. So this whole study really just boils down to who gets the earth at the end of it. And ultimately, the devil is trying to make sure that he gets the earth by keeping us trapped in this endless loop. And the whole point is to identify the loop so that we can exit it and go into God's loop. So, without further ado, I'm starting out the dying deity portion of this, and I would like to start it with a video. And this is just really timely. This video was actually one of the moments where I realized I needed to start actually getting this information out there, because these symbols are being presented to you on a silver platter as the people running the world are telling us that they're initiating us into this new age of Baal worship. And they won't tell you that in words, but they will present these pictures to you. So this video is kind of reminding me, and should remind you, whether we look at it or not, the images are out there, and God wants us to be able to look at the images and see what they mean so that we can avoid it and not fall into the system of the beast that they're trying to trap us in. I'll turn that down a little bit. So yeah, this was at the Birmingham Games. Birmingham specifically was chosen because that was a major slaughterhouse for bulls. And this bull took them about 5 months to assemble. Earlier on in this ceremony, the ceremony itself was like 40 minutes. I'm just going to do a quick clip where he initially was dragged out in chains, or by chains, and he was connected to all these women over here who were dragging him along. And he enters the arena right after all the world runners, kind of in the 72 Commonwealth nations.
Oops, sorry. Notice, so it's very, like, you don't notice this. Rewind it just a little bit. There's all of these little, as this is going on, there's all these little images that they have on sticks, and they're all
yes.
images we've seen.
There's a sun slash
sun,
star,
morning star. Some of these they're just all blatant. This one's a star as well. I can't really tell the other ones, but those are just like blatant. And then we have the bull with it, so it's pretty interesting.
And right over here is a large Tower of Babel depiction, and if you go do some more research, there's no doubt that it's the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
So what you see here is all these people are circling the beast, and this woman approaches it and pacifies him, and later on in the ceremony she's actually riding on top of this giant bull. And now the rest of the people start raising their hands and literally worshiping this bull. This was overseen by King Charles. Like, this isn't just some weird sideshow freak event. This is like a major world ceremony where they're showing us on the grand scale what's going on, and they're collecting all of these runners that were running around all the Commonwealth nations to encircle this Baal depiction and worship him. What's that?
How many nations?
72. Actually, I believe there were 71 people here, not including this woman who's leading them all. And according to what was his name? Tim Cohen. He's another source I have recently started using it because he's been putting these pieces together um, regarding this stuff long before I ever did. So I just recently kind of got the tip off on him. But there are 71 nations here in reference to the 70 nations that came out of Babylon, and the 71st being Israel. So this time they're leading Israel in this worship as like a show of defiance against the true God. So now that she's pacified him, he's gonna walk through the people, and they do a longer worship ceremony over this thing where the Tower of Babel is raised up and beams a shining light at the beast. But if you notice also, the lights were red at first, and as soon as she went up and pacified this bull, the lights calmed down, his eyes went white instead of red, and now we're going to do a major celebration.
Yay! And there's the Tower of Babel. Notice the Tower of Babel. So it's going to rise up, but notice...
I don't think it rises up in this video, but this platform...
Oh, yeah. This is water. So this Tower of Babel is sitting on water. The people's.
And now the beast is leading them, so everyone's celebrating and having a grand old time.
I wanted to share the head of the beast. It actually had inscriptions on it, and I looked up. Oh, it's so creepy. Some of the so there was a lot of names on the beast's head, but then at the
many names? Many names on the head of the beast?
Interesting. But in the nose, it was one of the parts was in the 1970s, people would look at you like you did not count. And power, it's the race on one side. The other side says, sorry, it's hard to decipher. Many doors were shut or closed in our faces. And then it says...
Pretty sure God shut those doors.
Yes. Yep. And then it says patience round. And then it says on the very front, which is the creepiest part, chronic hunger binds the cattle, any cattle, like with iron chain. Interesting.
One ring to bring them all.
Yeah, kind of like what they want to do to us. And then the other side was
not what they want to do, what they're actively doing.
Extremely creepy.
Show them.
Birmingham thrived on the slave trade. So, just interesting.
Here, show them the zoom in so they know you're not just making it up.
Yeah, so you can look it up yourself. I just looked up these images on Google Images.
Sorry, that light's kind
of... And we might even do a video on...
yeah, we'll definitely be doing a more in-depth video on these images and the modern day occurrences. But I wanted to start with that so that you know I'm not just like drudging up useless pictures that we don't see anymore that don't mean anything.
Yeah.
These pictures are showing us what's happening now. And the only way to understand the biblical prophecy of what's happening now is to go back to the beginning and understand what happened then. So hopefully that kind of opens your eyes to at least the potential that this is important. And also, I will also ask you one more thing. A lot of this information, because it's new and because it's referring to things that have been hidden from you, there are going to be elements and points where you probably get angry about something that I present or say. And that's completely normal, especially because we have been trained since birth under this society and under this beast, and the beast protects itself through our emotions. So they train us to love the enslavement. The Bible talks about it all the time. It's propaganda. And eventually, that's all you've ever known. And when somebody says, hey, that's actually evil, it's not an attack on you. It's not an attack on anybody who has lived in it, because ultimately it's you calling out the evil so that we can not be slaves to it anymore. So if you do catch yourself being upset or mad about it, just kind of ask yourself, do some reflective thinking, and try and dig to the root of where that anger's coming from. Because I believe that's a one of its bonds, where it's protecting itself from being found out by making you angry. And obviously there's going to be people that disagree and agree with that, and that's perfectly fine. That's just my understanding and my interpretation. So take it or leave it. Without With all that said, I'm going to get into this one. This one's a lot shorter than the first one because there's not as much of a foundation I need to set. So since we had to work backwards with Asherah, now we're going to test the Adam concept and work forward. So we're just going to start on the presumption that Adam is the male god, and we're just going to show how that just explains itself and proves itself as you play with it. And again, once you take these concepts and think about them, read the Bible yourself and see if stuff doesn't jump out at you different, because that's what happened with me. So back to Revelation 17, 1 through 5, just to reiterate from last time and refresh. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came, and he said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names. And it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitute and of earth's abominations. So we're going to get into the male version of the abomination. And I know I hit on Eve quite a bit last time, but again, like I said, Adam was the one that God directly spoke to and gave the law to. And he gets a much heavier punishment because he was closer to God's face. In the same way that Lucifer, or Azazel, or Satan, or the serpent, however you want to view that dichotomy, ultimately he was directly in the presence of the Father, and he gets the worst punishment of all. So ultimately you kind of see God playing this judging sequentially based on how close the assailant was to him. And Adam was supposed to give instruction, and instead he ended up leading his family in worship of Satan. So we're going to dig into what happened to him. The Great Harlot, as a refresher, is a prophetically synonymous with Asherah worship in the Bible. We went over Asherah's attributes. She's simultaneously a mother, a virgin, a harlot, a goddess of war, death, and trees, or forests. Some of her key images are the naked woman, the winged woman, the stylized tree, star, woman with a snake, and woman standing over or riding on a beast. Asherah, in a deeper spiritual sense, is a deified version of Eve. The rituals surrounding her worship were used to combat the curses God gave. And in this study, we will investigate ancient customs. But remember, it's still prevalent today. So keep that in the back of your head as well. And just kind of ask yourself where you see this. Because a lot of the times it's going to look like it's not important. But in the next video, we're going to try to connect. All right, we've shown you the images back then now. So look at them right now. But I think if you start connecting these dots and reflecting, you're going to start seeing them before I ever show you anything. So that's going to prove the information for itself. So Revelation tells us it will be prevalent today. And if it's not prevalent, this is all completely off base. So what was Adam's first sin? His major sin was allowing Eve to lead him into disobedience. When God rebuked Adam for his sin as a spiritual leader, instead of repenting and being the high priest that he was made to be, he instead passed his sin, passed his shame, and passed his authority over to Eve, along with the keys to earth. And then she did the same thing and passed that on to the serpent. And the serpent remained silent in the same way that Jesus or Yeshua remained silent when he was judged. The serpent took it because he knew that if he passed the blame on, then he lost the authority as well. So he took the authority of the earth in that moment, and he's not remaining silent anymore. So that's where he loses. Starting from the prophecies of Revelation, We can trace all the similarities of all these goddesses and their embodiments back to a singular story, the fall of Adam and Eve. If this association is legitimate, we should be able to follow the similarities of the goddess with Eve, as well as the similarities of Adam. So adding Adam to the equation will do that double check and add the scientific method of making sure this lines up. So going back to one of my favorite authors, Patai from the Sacred Tree, he says it is consistent with the terrible aspect. We've already referenced this, but again, I'm just going to draw it out as far as what happened to Adam in that moment. And through the Bible and through a lot of this ancient iconography, everybody acknowledged that the tree of knowledge was for Adam a tree of death. And I'm sure most of you are already familiar with the day is 1,000 years concept, but when God told Adam, on the day you eat of it, you will die, in the spiritual realm, a day is 1,000 years. So therefore, Adam dying at 900 and I think he was 980 something or 990 something, he literally died on that spiritual day, and he lived his entire life dead.
Another thing that we need to reiterate, I think, is in no way are we saying that Adam and Eve did not repent. There's no biblical evidence that they didn't repent. So we're not saying that they were these like evil figures like Ahab and Jezebel. But we can, that's being said, they committed, they were the mother and father of essentially of the lineage
They
of
modeled
mankind.
They modeled a sin that we're still following in.
Yeah.
And so it's not, you're not judging Adam and Eve, you're judging the sin. So
just like you would be held accountable for teaching your children something wrong and then passing it down over generation, you'd be held accountable. So are they held accountable, and they were held accountable for passing this on to generations to come.
And that's what Yeshua said. He who leads one of the little ones astray should have a millstone thrown around his neck and thrown into the sea. There's a reference there to Adam. So anyway, this might end up longer than the first one. So we're gonna go to the Adam's curse, and since all of the female goddesses line up with Eve's curse, we're gonna look at Adam's curse and continue that logical thread. The primary curse was, in toil you will eat of the ground all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles will grow up for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread, until you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And we don't really go into the serpent's curse, but I think it's pertinent to throw in really quick that the serpent's curse was to eat dust all the days of his life. So essentially, he cannot live if man isn't dying, because man goes back to dust. And the serpent needs man to die so that he can live. And when Yeshua or Jesus gives us eternal life, the serpent by proxy has to die. So one of us is going to die because of this contract we've made, and God is giving us a way to not be the one that's dead.
So that on that thread, in our next video, we will be discussing how essentially these rituals are celebration of man's death, separation from God, and man's fall. So in that Satan needs man to die
in his stead, as a scapegoat.
These rituals are all ceremonially man dying, recreating man's death, so that he doesn't have to get the death. He doesn't have to, he's passing his curses onto man via witchcraft.
That's really good.
As we're trying to go to these rituals and to the demons and to Satan for for our curses to be lifted, instead he's passing his curses onto us.
Boom.
Boom.
Perfect shoe-in. The natural phenomenon, according to Frazer, the natural phenomenon thus mythically conceived and mythically represented Here he's referring to the actual ceremonies. Were the great changes of the seasons, especially the most striking and impressive of all, the decay and the revival of vegetation. And the intention of the sacred drama was to refresh and strengthen, by sympathetic magic, the failing energies of nature in order that the trees should bear fruit, the corn or wheat should ripen, and men and animals should reproduce their kinds. So instantly we see the connection already to Adam's curse. Every single one of the points of the ceremonies for the dying deity is to counter the curse that God gave us. Instead of just going to him, we sewed fig leaves on ourselves, literally and figuratively.
No, notice that it says the decay and revival of vegetation, meaning the winter and the spring.
Yes. So we already kind of did one of these, just in less detail in the previous one, and that was more relating to the female deity. But this is a larger chart. I'll kind of leave it up for just a second to let you take a look and track it. It looks confusing, but it's really just a timeline from Sumer to Egypt to Canaan, Babylon, Greece, Assyria, and Rome. So it's
Mm-hmm.
throughout time, following how their names sort of shifted back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the images are pretty well the same. Um, and again, these are just the primary elements because
So
there
many
are
images.
images for all of them that just it gets
Jumbled.
too confusing to try to put all of them. So we just tried to select the primary image and the primary concepts,
Mm-hmm.
and the primary names throughout time. So Frazer goes after the conclusion of this inquiry. He puts this at the end after chapters and chapters of proving out these connections, and so um, we're going the other direction and going, okay, there were so many similarities between Adonis, Attis, and Osiris that their three mythical characters were basically viewed as the same person, just under different regions, just like Asherah was. All three of them apparently embodied the powers of fertility in general, and specifically of vegetation in particular. All three were believed to have died and risen again from the dead, and the divine death and resurrection of all three were dramatically represented at annual festivals. So the whole thing, all the way from the beginning, has always been a knockoff of what Jesus and Yeshua was intending to do. Satan knew that God had told him, "I'm going to send a man that is going to um, he's going to cut off this line of death, this this death and sin that we just keep passing on. Um, this this Adam is not going to fail. And from then forward, the serpent knows he's going to die. And that's why he was so wroth in Revelation. At that point, after Yeshua died and came to life again, he did what all of these stories were pretending to have the power to do. So all these mythologies, a lot of people get confused because there's so many deities that died and rose again, and they ask how Jesus can actually um, stand out from all of those. But when you look at the characteristic differentiation, it all makes perfect sense, and you see how all of them are the same, and Jesus is a stark differentiation. It's
Mm-hmm.
once you
Amen.
see it, you can't unsee it. So I will show that differentiation in this. This is not to confuse and try to muddle Jesus into that mix of all these Adonis. That's exactly what the serpent has done. He's tried to make it hard to identify Jesus through all of the fakes and
And
the counterfeits.
blasphemed him in the process.
Hmm. So that'll all make sense, and it'll prove why Jesus got the right on a legibly contractual basis. A bunch of the common images and the common titles and themes, again, are very, very well known to us as Christians. Lord, Master. Adonis was just the Hebrew of Adon.
Mm-hmm.
Baal was Hebrew for master.
Mm-hmm.
So even when we just say Lord, and I'm not one of those people that says that if you don't say God's name right, you're done. But the fact that religion has stripped us of the ability to call Him a name
Mm-hmm.
just further removes us from our ability to get to draw close to Him and know who we're talking to. So that's the whole point of all this, is to see him through all of these fake names. He was hanged on a tree and crucified in most cultures. Death and resurrection. He was a shepherd. He gave fertility of crops and animals. He was a son and the lover of the goddess. He was
In
a.
some instances, the brother. Like in Osiris, he
Mhm.
was the brother and lover of Isis, but for most of it, it's the son and lover.
His common images were the sun almost across the board, but in some cultures, the images between the male and the female switch,
Hmm.
and that's a reference to the androgynous qualities of them, how they'll just kind of bounce back and forth. So in some cultures, the male god is seen as a tree, and then sometimes the female god is seen as an obelisk, and they just like they get
Dance around.
confusing if you don't understand. They're actually like blending themselves for the sake of confusion. It's the androgynous element of this deity.
Hmm.
It was a bowl, and the bowl, you'll see this everywhere once you notice it. A lot of the times, this bowl depiction, when it's meant to be a religious picture, will have an udder and horns. So it's
Hmm.
I've seen these in like next to state buildings, like on
Tell
city
them
squares.
about Pennsylvania, that downtown. Where was it? We stayed there.
Um,
It's where Hershey Park is.
I'm trying to remember the name of the city.
Let me look it up.
But,
Phone's
so
dying.
anyway, I'll
So the bowl with
we
the
when we were
udders and
there in
horns.
this city, we were just walking up and down the city with the kids, and there's this large bowl in front of like in the major economic district of the city, and it just looks like a bowl at first, and then you see it has an udder. And like once you point it out and say that's not just a regular bowl, this is a depiction of this deity, you'll see it everywhere. Like you'll see it on pictures, you'll see it on paintings, on like kids' toys even. Cows don't have udders, but they throw these on, and it's not like they're ignorant of physiology.
Hmm.
It's a
Harrisburg.
Harrisburg. That's right.
Harrisburg.
So yeah,
Downtown Harrisburg had, honestly, on every single block, a bowl with horns and udders. On every single block. I'm not exaggerating. It's shocking, and it was just baffling to us. Another thing I thought of that we just discussed today is that a part of this cult of androgynous, um,
yep.
qualities, and celebrating androgyny and celebrating transgenderism of this, satanic cult that has been since the dawn of man is that the enemy either wants man and woman to hate each other or not even know what gender they are. Like, it's solely that. They either want them fighting and at
And
odds with
killing
each
each
other
other.
and killing each other, or one reigning over the other, or they want and enslaving the other and holding the other captive, or they want us to not even be able to procreate because we don't even know who we are.
And if
So,
we do procreate, they got to make sure that we kill those children, sacrifice them to Moloch. It's
yeah.
absolutely demonic, and the entire system that we live in today is explained by this concept. Like
Hmm.
the principles of our daily life where people just get abortions for the sake of convenience.
Hmm.
It's just another head of this god. The You don't take your baby up to the altar of Moloch anymore. You go to a hospital and get a man in a white lab coat to kill it for you.
Hmm.
It's
A
this
priest.
it's the same priesthood. It's the same concepts. It's just split into different pieces where it's cleaned up where the sacrifice isn't in public anymore. It's done in private. It's all cleaned up and pretty and
Hmm.
sterilized, so we can just put on our blinders and walk around perfectly ignorant to it, and they get away with doing what they want to do, and we think we can remain blissfully ignorant.
Hmm.
But that period's up. Like they're putting it in our face, going, okay, by the way, we're doing this,
Hmm.
and if we don't wake up and go, that's evil, then we will go along with it.
Hmm.
So who was Tammuz? That's a Tammuz was one of the, I think he was the earliest personification of Tammuz slash Dumuzi, the Babylonian Sumerian fertility god. And if I miss anything, tell me. But um, he has these
I
crosses.
can explain it.
Yeah, go for it.
So he has these crosses. There's several. There's four, if you notice. There is two that he is holding, and then there's two behind him. And so the image. So it's very interesting in all of these mythologies. The male deity is either carrying a shepherd's staff or a cross, and that's quite interesting. And we know, what that kind of resembles, obviously.
And you'll notice the pine cones on the
And there's
crosses.
pine cones on the crosses. So it's also referring to that he is a vegetation deity and that he helps with vegetation of crops.
And the pine cone specifically was a very
Fertility
sacred image in
image,
Babylon.
yes.
This was another thing I saw the stelas in the Louvre and
Hmm.
the History Museum in London. And that was when I was starting to read about the pine cones, and I
Hmm.
literally saw these stelas all
Yeah.
through this museum, and they're using this pine cone as a fertility image, and they would have a bucket of water and the pine cone primarily.
Hmm.
I'm sure you've seen it, but anyway, go on.
So there's goats on each side, and we talked about how there's goats in Asherah worship as well, and in those images. The goat is just symbolic of occultism. It's just everywhere. It's in both male and female. And then if you notice, these are young boys, and it's pretty apparent that they're priests of Tammuz, and Tammuz also practiced castration of young boys and men. So, and then they have these whips. It's just quite interesting. I've never seen anything like the whips. But that's the key image is the cross, and if you see, he's holding it very much like a staff or a
It's
in
like an ankh or a
yeah, an
crozier.
ankh was a shepherd's staff, but it
No, the ankh was
resembled
the Egyptian pharaoh's
yes,
staff.
it
Oh yeah,
symbolized
yeah, yeah.
a
Yep.
shepherd's staff, but it resembled not only divinity but kingship.
See, this is why you do the pictures.
Yeah, and you're so good at your stuff goes over my head. This is from the Museum of Berlin, by the way, and it's 1500 BC. So I mean, this is in a museum. Like all of these images are in museums. This is not hard to find if you know where to look. There.
All right. The major point from this, I'm sure you've already read it, was every year Tammuz was believed to die, and specifically the divine mistress would journey into the underworld to find him. So the woman goes and saves man from his death. There's some issues there.
Oh yeah.
The worship of Adonis was practiced by the Semitic peoples of Babylonia and Syria, and the Greeks borrowed it from them as early as the 7th century before Christ. The true name of the deity was Tammuz. The appellation of Adonis is merely the Semitic Adon, or Lord, a title of honor by which his worshippers addressed him. The name Adonai is the Hebraic version of that. You're calling God your master. So even the names Adonis and Baal, they've always been very, very similar appellations to God's names, and you have to be able to distinguish not between the name, but between who is hiding behind the name, and that's the important part. Like, what are the practices behind the name? Naturally, the Semitic colonists brought their gods with them from their motherland when they migrated. They worshipped Baal of the Lebanon, who may well have been Adonis, and at Amathus on the south coast, or Amathus I believe it is, they instituted the rites of Adonis and Aphrodite, or rather Astarte. Here at Byblus, these rites resembled the Egyptian worship of Osiris so closely that some people even identified the Adonis of Amathus with Osiris. In the great spring festival of Cybele and Attis, it is best known to us in the form it was celebrated at Rome. There's a lot of records left from Rome, so that's why there's such a large focal point on the Roman point of this. The Babylon, Assyria, Greece, they all got conquered, so their libraries got burnt.
Mm-hmm.
Rome never got conquered. They never had someone come in and just
Ding ding
burn everything.
ding. That's a clue.
And
Rome
they
never got
spread
conquered.
from every they spread to everywhere from there. So the information is very, very sparse, um, er, relatively. Like there's a lot of it, but it's relatively sparse compared to Rome and even Greek. There's lots of info on Greek religion because it was so close to Rome. So just it just kind of starts to line up when you go, why is it like this? The older religions have had a lot longer to be overcome and burned and buried and destroyed and lost. So in this great spring festival of Cybele and Attis, um, we are informed that the Roman ceremonies were also Phrygian, so we may assume that they differed hardly, if at all, from the Asiatic original. The substantial similarity of their characters, Adonis, Attis, and Osiris,
So
just
that's Greek, Rome, and Egypt. So three different, completely different locations, especially Egypt
and timelines.
and timelines. Proceed, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to collect my thoughts. I don't do well with being interrupted.
Sorry.
You're fine. I just have to like reboot my thoughts. All three apparently embodied the powers of fertility in general and of vegetation. I think I already quoted that. We may have put this one in here twice, but um, it's there again.
Yes. Well, it's important. To have died and risen again from the dead. So this is just a modern interpretation of Adonis. It's the 18th century. But it's, I mean, obviously, there's so much.
The story of him being killed by a boar
Yeah.
is significant, and we'll dig into that.
Oh, yes.
But this is the death. That was one of the perceptions. There are two stories as to how he died.
Yeah, and that's more, so Adonis is more the Greek perspective.
Sorry, I have audio
And
issues
we're
every once in a while.
back.
It's great. This is so not professional. I'm just
I like it this
we're
way.
just spitballing it.
Well, I think we are very laid back people.
Yeah.
We are not gonna try to prove.
I'm not gonna try to filter this or like
We are who we
edit
are.
it out.
Take it
It's
or leave it.
just this is what we got. So
This is who
have
we
fun.
are. It's very Anywho, Adonis is Greek. So this is like a Greek interpretation, but most of the other ones are trees. So that's Roman. Egypt has a little bit of a different one because Set murdered.
Most of them had two different stories.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, because Frazer mentions a tree also in Egyptian. But yeah. Anyway, proceed.
So one of the other gods whose supposed death and resurrection struck deep roots into the faith and ritual of Western Asia is Attis. He was to Phrygia what Adonis was to Syria. Attis was said to have been a fair young shepherd or herdsman, beloved by Cybele, the mother of the gods, a great Asiatic goddess of fertility. We know. Who had her chief home in Phrygia. Some even held that Attis was her son.
So son and lover. Son and lover. Like, how beyond repulsive.
And so if you look at this in a spiritual lens, again, it makes sense because what happened when Eve, instead of following God, took the fruit and ate of it, she became the firstborn of Satan. Like, so she became the first inheritress of Satan, and then she led Adam into that sin, and then he became her son in that spiritual sense. So the term, what was the anyway? So in essence, she chose the serpent as her father, and Adam chose her as his mother instead of being the priest, going to God, repenting, and just clearing the air. He continued down this path, and we can't even call him names for it because we're still doing it after thousands of years. So it's like we can't even be like
we are continuously eating of the fruit.
Every year, every day.
Mocks, dang you, Eve, dang you, Adam, but we still do it. Still. So these images are also very interesting. if you notice, so here's Cybele. We've discussed a lot of Cybele and her lion. And so we see that her lions in both of these. This one's 2nd century BC. This is 387 AD. So completely different centuries. And it's pretty much the exact same image, and the same relationship. So we have Cybele seated on her chariot with her lion that we know she rides.
Here, take this for a second.
Okay. She rides her beast in both of these. And then obviously, so we have 2 trees on each side of them. And so the interesting thing about Cybele and Attis and the relationship of Cybele / Diana and Attis is both had sacred groves associated to them. So it's quite interesting that they're both right next to a tree, and they have pine cones, obviously a fertility symbol that we've seen before. But both you'll see have ceremonial customs dedicated to both Diana and Attis, as well as their symbol is both a grove, a sacred grove. So that's very interesting. So we see both 2 trees on each side of them. And then here he's holding his shepherd's staff in his hand. It's something kind of hidden. And then in this one, if you see on the side, these are Attis's eunuch priests that are beside him here. So that's what that's representing. And I have yet to understand what this is. To me, it looks like she's holding her hand out and the moon is behind her because one of her images is the moon. But I don't know. It could just be a crack. It could be some sort of other image. A staff in its own right, a whip, I'm not sure, but that's just like it's interesting that it kind of looks like a moon behind her. You know, take it or leave it. Here you go.
Thank you. All right, here's where we get to the stories. There are 2 different accounts of the death of Attis. According to one of them, he was killed by a boar, like Adonis. And according to the other, he emasculated himself under a pine tree and bled to death on the spot. After his death, Attis is said to have been changed into a pine tree. When he emasculated himself, he turned into the female version of the idol. The tree was the Asherah. He became the female goddess.
Man will rule over you. So we can't have man. Female.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
The Emperor Claudius incorporated the Phrygian worship of the sacred tree, and with it probably the orgiastic rites of Attis, in the established religion of Rome. Certainly the Romans were familiar with the Galli, the emasculated priests of Attis, before the close of the Republic. So now that we've gotten some history... oh wait, there's one more before we're about to start getting into some Bible stuff and connecting some dots.
I always have to share all the disturbing stuff. Okay, so heads up, disturbing. I might need the thing.
All right, go for it.
Let's do this. Okay, so this image is quite important for our study. This is the Sanctuario de Attis, the Sanctuary of Attis.
You needed to do it just because you can do the accents.
In Ostia, Italy. And this is a temple to Cybele. And in this temple of Cybele, there is a dedicated shrine to Attis itself. So, himself. And in this shrine, we have this image of a very feminine looking man that's standing here. I believe this was his this was his former, I've researched this. This was his former man. This was himself before.
I was going to say, the
faces
look really similar.
This was himself before he became the first priest of Cybele. And so this is him leaning on it. I am so much
more above. And if you look, like, this is, um, just like, if you just look here, just when not the face is what looks masculine. I mean, that looks very feminine, like, straight up. It's quite interesting. We'll get into the crown after I read this, but this is a poem that's a plaque, or it's like engraved in this shrine, or like on it, beside this image. It's a poem there. And it says, in the woods a Phrygian boy Attis, of handsome face, won the tower-bearing goddess Cybele with his chaste passion. She desired him to serve her and protect her temple, and said, wish you might be a boy forever. He promised to be true, and said, if I'm lying, may the love I fail in be my last love. Attis failed to keep his promise. He tore at his body too with a sharp stone, and dragged his long hair in the filthy dust, shouting, I deserved this. I paid the due penalty in blood. Ah, let the parts that harmed me perish. Let them perish. Cutting away the burden of his groin, and suddenly bereft of every mark of manhood, his madness set a precedent, and his unmanly servants toss their hair and cut off their members as if it is worthless.
So disturbing.
So disturbing. This was Roman culture. This was Roman society. This was everywhere. And so if you notice the face, what does that look like to you? Do you have any guesses?
Just do like a zoom. Do, do, do.
I think it looks like the Statue of Liberty. I mean, I'll let you think what you want to think, but it's sure.
You mean Larry Liberty?
Larry Liberty. It looks like Larry Liberty in here.
I didn't pen that, by the way, so I'm not taking credit.
You should. Oh, you didn't?
No,
oh.
I didn't pen that. I'm not taking
Oh my
credit.
goodness. That somebody needs to, like, copyright that. That's a great term. Anyway, I mean, it's not funny. We use humor to.
I think that was Jim Staley.
Oh, brilliant.
I need my mic.
Oh, well, anyway, I was going to bring up.
Okay.
So, sorry. So we see this image that's supposed to be a beacon of freedom in our society, in our culture, when people entered America.
It was actually
this
made
was
by,
their first sign that they were in the freest land in the world.
It was actually made by a French designer who was obsessed with Egyptology and these ancient religions.
Yes.
So it's not a stretch. Like, the imagery is all the same. It's
Amen.
actually really, really... That really hit me hard for, like, years, where I was like, no, there's no way. There's no way. It can't be. Like, it's not right.
So here's another one. So this is 1st, 2nd century. A plaque depicting Attis armed with a sword. The sword was the only purpose for the sword was to unman himself. Like, straight up. That was his only purpose for a sword. And holding his shepherd's staff. So we see, obviously, his shepherd's staff image as well. And this was in Roman furniture, so they just had it in their home, you know. Attis is a boy sculpture, so this is very just beyond disturbing. And he has his shepherd's staff in his hand, and then also a lyre, which is quite interesting as well.
This shows why, like, schools are hitting
Yes.
children so hard and working so hard to get this transgenderism into kids.
Yes.
Like, it's the next stage of this demonic religion where they're trying to go, okay, well, now we're claiming these children and we're going to make them transgendered from as early on as possible. Anything other than demonic fails to acknowledge the depth of how wrong it is. And I'll actually take a second here and go, like, one of the reasons this study took me so long is because I could only take, especially at first, I could only take little snippets of research before I just got, like, dark and started to feel bitter and, like, angry and disgusted and just, like, wrong. And I just have to put the whole thing down and pause it for forever until God, like, threw a source in my face and went, hey, take a look at this. And I'd be like, I don't want to, but but it's been this process of him slowly just kind of, like, taking me by the ear almost and being like, hey, look at this, and throwing these sources at me, and one by one they've just kind of slowly been digested to the point where I get it. And so, like, you should be disturbed by
Yes.
this. It's normal. Like, you want,
It's
it
disgusting.
should disgust you.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. Like, these are the things that are hidden in plain sight.
Another thing that I just thought of that's very important to note on the boy sculpture is that Roman culture, pedophilia was completely normal and celebrated. It's so beyond disturbing. And in Roman society, up into the 1700s, they were still doing it in the early 1800s, the 19th century. There was in opera, there was a castrato singer, and the castratos, it literally means castrated in Italian, and they would castrate these young boys before they hit puberty so that their voices would be feminine and have a different tonal quality. And they did this up into the 1800s. There's actually a recording, a record of the last castrato ever that ever lived, his singing, and they celebrated this, and they made it illegal, but people still practiced it. And they say it's for singing, but it's intertwined so much with Roman culture and these satanic societies of Rome, Egypt, Babylon, all of it. It was so deeply intertwined. It had, I mean, sure, it was about sex,
Yeah.
you know.
And I mean, they did the same thing even like with modern artists. They'll give these artists, I know they did it with Justin Bieber. As they
Yeah.
start aging, they'll give them hormone blockers and chemically castrate them to keep them from
Barbaric.
from developing into puberty and changing their voice. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just different methods.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, this is still me.
Yeah,
Okay.
just go for it.
Okay, I'm just gonna go for it. So here's a carving of Attis, and if you notice, he's leaning on the tree. There's two groves. I believe this is probably the grove of Diana. If you see all of the pictures of like frescoes of Roman images of Diana, she usually was like a cypress tree, like a long, like a, you know, one of these taller, like skinnier
Phallic trees.
Yeah, essentially. Whereas he was more associated with the pine, the evergreen, and the oak tree. And so here's more of like a willowy tree. There's actually two, and he's leaning on it. And like we've said, when deities are on something, like on an image, when they're vertical to an image, when they're side by side, it's not random. They're showing ownership of that image. That image is a part and synonymous with that deity.
Although in this instance, it's more he's reclining on it, showing his marriage to the tree.
Yes.
So
That's a great point.
it's playing out the, if you remember back in the sacred grove of Nemi, how that high priest would guard that one sacred tree in the middle.
Yeah.
That was a tree he was married to, and he would literally, like, he would set out a picnic blanket and he would put food on it,
Yes.
and he would eat and drink wine and pour wine on the tree. So this is like he's just like perfectly at home, just kind of lounging and resting, and I believe this is a depiction of that
That's
priest
a very
in
good
marriage to the
point.
tree.
And I mean, there's even, sounds insane, but there is marriages to trees even to this day, and that was a common custom of these cultures.
A lot of tribal cultures still do it.
Yeah, to marry these trees. So it's quite interesting. So this is from the Pergamum Museum, go figure. And it's Attis, very boyish-like with wings. So eventually, like we've talked about, a lot of the male qualities, especially the more dying deity, the one that was resurrected, acquires more feminine attributes. One, because they were castrated, so they had to show, oh, they're not a man anymore, a man. But in the other sense, it was one for confusion, and it was just celebrate androgyny. So.
And it was a transference, because if you notice, the male god emasculates himself and becomes effeminate, and the female goddess, if you remember, her blending. You see images where she's very feminine, and then you'll start to see her with a bearded aspect and a
Yes,
masculine aspect.
like
So
we
she's
talked about
actually
with Nana.
transferring and taking this male's virility
Yeah.
in a very real sense, and the pictures are depicting that. She's taking his manliness and leading in war and in conflict and and love.
Amen. And so this is
Oh, the wheel.
Cybele.
Point out the wheel. It's the same
Yes,
as
so
the
the
Baal.
chariot wheel.
We just saw that image.
Yes, that's the same image as the Baal video that we saw, first off, the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games. But this is also a morning star, so we have that right here. So we have Cybele, and this is super interesting. It looks like she's holding the moon. Does it not look like that? It's like this orb that she's holding. And I believe she's holding...
It's okay if you don't know. We'll just move on.
No, I believe she is holding wheat or grass in her hand. I think that was a custom that was another trait that I've known.
And again, he's lounging on that tree.
She's lounging, and there's pine cones on this one. So he's lounging on the tree, and yeah, that's just.
And she's blessing him with her presence.
Yeah, and he's like lauding after her. He's like, interesting. And notice she's clothed and he's nude, pretty much. He's like in a loincloth. So that's a very interesting picture.
Okay, so now we're going to get to some of the biblical references and show these names. Like, we read right over them, but they're all through the Bible, all over the place. And that was kind of the thing when I started to realize this is a big deal to God. This is Ezekiel 8. We already talked about earlier in Ezekiel when he saw the abomination of desolation, or the image of jealousy in the temple courts. This is the same passage where God is walking him through and saying, this is why I'm leaving. This is why I can't be in my own house. Because there were women sitting in the temple weeping for Tammuz. And he said to me, do you see this, son of man? Yet you will see even greater abominations than these. It's always been the same story. He goes, stop it. This weeping for Tammuz has to stop. And you're doing it in my own temple. I'm out of here. And he burns the whole thing down. So a cross-reference with Frazer, saying that on the Day of Blood, that was the day they did the mourning for Tammuz, over an effigy of him, which was afterwards buried. The image was thus laid in the sepulchre and was probably the same that they had hung on a tree. Interesting imagery. Further, we may conjecture, though we are not expressly told, that it was on the same Day of Blood and for the same purposes that the novices would sacrifice their virility. Wrought up to the highest pitch of religious excitement, they dashed the severed portions of themselves against the image of the cruel goddess. And what was the image of the goddess? It was the tree. The pine tree, the palm tree, the beech tree, sometimes the oak tree, the terebinth tree. But anyway, the stylized tree. They did something to the tree to make it the image of the goddess.
And so what does that mean by the novices sacrifice their virility?
It was their initiation into the priesthood. They would emasculate themselves, as these poems have told us, and they would actually take their testicles. Sorry for...
I mean, it is what it is.
It is what it is at this point. Like, your kids shouldn't be watching this.
No, we've already said. Warning!
Explicit content. It's absolutely barbaric and disgusting, but it has...
It needs to be addressed.
We need to see how evil it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, they would take their testicles and they would throw them on this tree. I just don't even... did you cut out the Elijah stuff? You did. Okay, I'll have to talk about this.
I didn't know I did.
The passage in Kings, when... You'll have to go and look this up because I don't know it off the top of my head. I thought I had it in this presentation.
Oh, look at that.
The priests of Baal, when they were trying to get Baal to respond to them, worked themselves up into a frenzy. They were dancing, cutting themselves with knives and with potsherds. They were waggling their hair. They were playing instruments and essentially spattering. They were spattering blood all over the altar. That's the quick and dirty of it. And it's a direct contrast to this. Elijah came and said, if God is God, serve him. If Baal is God, serve him. So all the priests of Baal did their sacrifice. 1 Kings
1 Kings
18,
18. Let me
28, or
get,
just pick up the whole chapter.
I'm going to try to find
Actually, I can...
First King.
I'll just pull it up.
Yeah, let's pull it up. Why not? Why not?
Where is...
Search bar? Oh, look at that. Oh no! Now
Oh,
we can't
okay.
look it up.
My
Our
keyboard's...
toddler's messed with our keyboard.
Never mind.
I will look it up. 1 Kings 18. You guys look it up too. We have the time. You've got the time.
It's
We've got
okay.
the
It's
time.
all right. We're just gonna move.
No. But it's a very good part.
I mentioned
Oh my goodness, it was good. Okay.
Okay.
So here we are.
Here, I got it. Paper's faster than...
Paper's faster. I can't type. Oh, here we go.
It's too late. I got it on paper.
Okay.
Let me see.
18. I have 23 is good. Through 25. Actually, through 27. Actually, through 28.
So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, this is starting in 25, choose one bowl for yourselves and prepare it first, for you are many, and call on the name of your God to put no fire under it. So they took the bowl which was given to them, and they prepared it and called on the name of Baal from morning even until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, no one answered. Then they leaped about the altar which they had made. And so it was at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is meditating, or he's busy, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's sleeping and must be awakened. So they cried aloud and cut themselves, as was their custom. This isn't a new thing. It was their custom, with knives and lances until the blood gushed out of them. And when midday was past, they prophesied prophesied is the wrong word here. The Hebrew word is raved. They changed this word out with Saul a lot, saying he was prophesying in the house. He was raving in the house. Until the time of the offering, of the evening sacrifice. But there was no voice, and no one answered. So, this is everywhere, all through the Bible. And it's every single time the reason God is sending Elijah in the last day, before the great and terrible day of the Lord, is for the same reason. Elijah was sent to divide the people between Baal and God. And that's what we're going to see again. Here we're going to continue with Osiris. He was slain by Typhon. Typhon was the chaos snake monster. Osiris's divine spouse Isis survived, and she brought him back to life again. This feature of this myth seemed to indicate that in the beginning, Isis was what Astarte and Cybele always continued to be, the stronger of the pair. But the three gods did not stand by themselves. The mythical personification of nature, of which all three were in at least one aspect the products, required that each of them should be coupled with the goddess. And in each case it appears that originally the goddess was a more important personage than the god. At all events, it is always the god rather than the goddess who comes to a sad end, whose death is annually mourned. And I think that's later. We have an origin story from the book of Jasher referring to that, so we'll just kind of throw a little teaser at you. So the yearly festival of the death and resurrection of Tammuz and the other dying deities bears a host of similarities to the Garden of Eden account. And just like with Asherah, it's not just one, it's not just two, it's every single major feature. The serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Satan established gods throughout the world as a celebration of Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit and man's death, thus making them like God. As Israel participated in these festivals and celebrating the moment mankind sinned, sinned and was separated from the Father. Instead of repenting for this great sin, they used witchcraft continually and prostrated themselves to Satan to avoid the repercussions that God passed down. This resulted in the Father drawing farther away from them and selling them to the gods they worshipped. It's a continual, I mentioned this in the last video, it's just a continual process of us choosing separation. God keeps going, I'm going to give you life on this side and death on this side. And he explains it and lays it out, and we're like, okay, well, death looks fun. I'll take that. And he keeps, Jeremiah has a passage, I can't quote it off the top of my head, but he says, like, I weep for my people because you keep choosing death. Like, I'm offering life, and you just choose death.
I have it pulled up.
So, it's in here later.
No, I think it's actually in the third one. So I'm going to read it.
Oh, okay.
So this is Jasher, take it or leave it. Chapter 3, 14 through 16. It says, it was in the 56th year of the life of Lamech when Adam died. 930 years old was he at his death, and his two sons with Enoch and Methuselah his son buried him with great pomp as at the burial of kings in the cave which God had told them. And in that place all the sons of men made a great mourning and weeping on account of Adam. It has therefore become a custom among the sons of man to this day.
There
and
it is.
Adam died because he ate of the tree of knowledge, he and his children after him, as the Lord God had spoken.
Boom. Thank you.
Boom.
Yeah, that did need to go in right there. So another, continuing the summary, the male deity was always the weaker counterpart. The god was simultaneously the lover and the son of the goddess. The stories of the male deities Osiris, Adonis, Tammuz, and Attis coincide with the story of Adam dying from eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So therefore the worship and the celebration. I don't know why my headphones, they just randomly will just decide to turn off after a while. So more sound issues. I'm not even going to edit it. We're just going to blast it. Anyway, the worship for these deities was for fertility for vegetation. So specifically, the worship of the female goddess was for fertility of the women, to have children as an offspring, and to have easy childbirth. Because ironically, they would do these fertility rituals, and then they would murder the babies that were resulted from those rituals. So it's always, that's how the devil works. He goes, oh, okay, if you do this, I'll give you children, but you have to kill them. That's worse than not having a child.
Rumpelstiltskin.
Yeah, Rumpelstiltskin for sure. And that was a contrast with God and Abraham, where God said, do not touch your kids. Do not harm him. I want you to give him to me, but give me his life, not his death. Same with Samuel. His life was dedicated to God, not his death. That's a really powerful and important contradiction. God asks for us to devote our children to life and blessing. That's why we're supposed to instruct them on everything in the Bible, to teach them to choose the life. And that's pops up all through the New Testament, where before it talked about how Jesus grew up to be able to choose the good and reject the evil from a very young age. Okay, so the dying deities also resemble and profane the Messiah, the perfected Adam. And this is proven out in 1 Corinthians, where Paul makes a specific correlation, understanding these elements that we're just now relearning. For as in Adam all died, so in Christ all will be made alive. So because all of us followed into Adam's death, if we follow Messiah in his life, we will live. So we can either follow Adam's death or we can follow Messiah. You can't follow Messiah the way Adam is worshipped or honored or revered. There's always been a distinction, because the Messiah had a life and he lived a life, and you cannot honor the things of death and also honor the life of the Messiah. So thus it is written, the first man Adam became a living being, The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Romans 5:19. For as by the one man's, and if you want to like pop in and interject, like
You're doing great.
just punch me.
You're doing
Don't take
great.
that too literally. For as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous. And here's where the parable of the two sons pops up. Like when you start to see what these things mean, the whole Bible, all of the parables of Jesus come to life. Where he's going, okay, so the father had two sons and he told one of them go do this and this and this, and the first son said, yes, I will do it, but didn't. That was Adam, and that was Israel at the mountain saying, yes, we will do all you have said. We will do it all. But they didn't. And Yeshua, Jesus, came to make the opposite distinction, going, I came later, I came after. So he was the first son where the father said, go do this and this, and initially the son didn't do it, but then he did it. And he says, which one of these is the father going to be pleased with? Obviously, the one that did what needed to be done. So the goal of the enemy here is in recreating this false deity is to blaspheme the truth and the victory of Jesus and to plagiarize his story and his sacrifice. In doing this, he muddies the waters and makes finding the real Messiah almost imperceptible, almost impossible among all of the counterfeits.
I mean, why do you think that there's so many? I can't tell you how many atheists, agnostics have told me, oh, but there's a million copies of Jesus. How do you know that you're celebrating Yeshua?
That was my first struggle in the military because I went from very, very, very under a rock Torah keeping, like intense biblical structure, to everyone going, there's no such thing as religion. Look at all these fake gods. Jesus is just another one of them. And I went, okay, like what am I missing? Because I didn't understand why I was doing anything or what it all meant or what it connected to. So it was just like, yeah, this is confusing. It all looks like the same thing. And it does look like the same thing until you identify the specific pivot points. Because the pivot points are what define the evil son from the righteous son.
Or the sheep versus the goats.
So here, like, we start, it's so blatant how these gods are just hijacking the worship of Jesus. That Yeshua, Jesus, is our Lord. He's our master. He's our savior from sin. He was hanged on a tree, crucified. The tree was a symbol of death. He was literally crucified and impaled on our symbol of death. And his blood poured out on that tree to sanctify us. That didn't sanctify the tree. It was freeing us from the blood bond of it, separating us from the curse. Like that, he died so that we could turn away from this thing that would marry ourselves to and marry him instead. The death and the resurrection, the good shepherd, the Son of God, the manna or the bread from heaven, the bridegroom, specifically born of a virgin. That's in every ancient cult. Satan just loves hijacking these miracles and going, I did that, but he didn't. Like he's saying he did, but there's no proof. It's all a bunch of lies.
Yeah. So in the dying deities, we've talked about hanged on a tree, death and resurrection. She was a shepherd. He was a son and a lover of the goddess. So we have the Son of God, who is holy and upright, and then this one's blasphemous, the son and the lover, which is a completely unholy relationship. Then we have the
which is condemned by Scripture. Yes. So it can't be the Messiah because all of the Messiah's rules he breaks.
And Yeshua is the manna from heaven. He's our bread. He's our food. He's our sustenance. And then we have the dying deities. They give you fertility of crops. They give you lots of animals. They give you food, essentially. The bridegroom, and then so he's our bridegroom. He's the bride's bridegroom. And the dying deities, it's simultaneous eunuch and lover. So it's also an unholy relationship.
One that you can't bear seed from.
Yes, one that you can't bear fruit. And then there's the born of a virgin and born of a virgin. But also, a illegitimate harlot relationship simultaneously. So it was always there's these little things that are added to these dying deities that make it one blasphemous, but two just detestable.
And of course that's gonna piss God off.
Yeah.
He's like, that has nothing to do with me.
Or my son.
Yeah. Or my son, specifically my son.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go back to this Day of Blood. We kind of jumbled the order there a little bit. That's on us. But going back to this Day of Blood, the mourners would fast from bread beforehand, and that's where we get the Lent
concept
countdown from. It's even the same amount of days. They would just fast and mourn over this deity, which is something that was God never asked for. He asked us to celebrate his life. The feast days in the Bible are feast days. They're celebrations. Yeah, we're not celebrating his death. We're celebrating his victory over death.
You're right.
So this imagery, like, honestly gave me goosebumps. It was so creepy the first time I read it because you could read this in any church about Jesus. Like, he hijacks even some of the most, like, clear details that are specifically Jesus, Yeshua carried them out. But it doesn't matter. Like, he doesn't care if we tell the story alongside these things. According to the prophet, I'll deal with all that stuff later. My ADD brain wants to go crazy on me. I'm gonna rein it in. But the worshippers' sorrow was turned to joy. Suddenly a light shone in the darkness. The tomb was opened. The God had risen from the dead. On the morrow, the 25th day of March. So this was a spring equinox version. So we'll get into the division of the spring and the winter celebrations and how they bounce back and forth. It's just like the androgynous qualities where they'll have the male and the female, and they'll sort of switch places. You have the same thing sometimes.
With the winter and
some religions
summer,
will switch the winter celebration and the spring celebration, as far as like the main points and the focal points. And I think that's just a confusion technique to throw people off and be like, okay, well, they did this in the spring here and they did this in the spring here.
So they surely can't be the same thing because they're not the same time frame.
But it's the same festival. They're just
and they're the same rituals
swapped. Yeah.
And they're the same deities.
Same stuff.
And they're the same images. So it's like just because they might be at different times, you know, they're the exact same in everything besides time.
They're still the dedicated times of that deity, and he gets to decide what we do on those times, according to him. And I say no.
Oh, you didn't read that one, did you?
Oh no, it was reckoned. I figured they've all read it by now.
The divine resurrection was celebrated with wild outbursts of glee.
Cool. Good job.
So these are just an interesting depiction. We have Horus and Osiris. So Horus was the mother of Osiris. Some believe that Horus.
No, Horus was the father. That's Isis. Isis.
No, so that's the thing is some believe.
No. Horus was the male.
Oh.
Isis was the female. Horus was the father.
Isis.
And Osiris was the son that was the personification of Horus's rebirth.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
after Horus died, or I may have those flipped with the names. There's so many names jumbling around.
Yeah.
But after Horus died, no, sorry, it was Osiris that died.
Yes.
His pieces were cut apart.
Yes.
And spread throughout the city.
Yes.
And Isis went and collected those pieces.
Yes.
And
journeyed to the underworld.
Journeyed to the underworld and had sex with his corpse.
That's
and
fun.
Created the seed. Her son was Horus, and he was seen as the reborn personification of Osiris. So it's this son, lover.
I did not know about the.
Yeah, super
disturbing.
creepy, disturbing relationship.
So anyway.
So originally Osiris and Isis were brother sister.
Yes.
So she slept with her brother, made a child that was then his and her son, and it was also, um, yeah.
Okay. So we have Osiris, baby Osiris, and then if you look, there's Tammuz and Ishtar. So
Here
Ishtar
you can use
was
the
the
math.
mother deity to Tammuz, and Tammuz, like she's holding Tammuz in there in her hands. And then we have, what do we have? The Madonna and Jesus, and he has a sunbeam around a morning star around behind his head, a sun burst.
And it's actually very common in Rome where whenever the Roman church turned Christian, they went around and took these images of Osiris and
Yep.
Ishtar and Isis,
They just
and
wrote
they
Jesus
literally
on
just
it.
changed the plaque and went Jesus and Mary.
Yep, that's all they did.
Which we'll get into this later in the other presentations, but that specifically God told Israel, when you go into these lands and take it over, don't do that.
Yeah.
You're not just going to scratch my name on their altar. You're going to burn the whole thing, and then we're going to build my religion.
Yeah.
So it's whether or not it was meant for good,
And
it was completely
does God ever
against
ask
what the
us,
Bible said to do.
Does God ever ask us to make an image of him, period? It doesn't matter if it's in the likeness of man. It doesn't matter if it's, resembling, you know. Does he ask us? He says the polar opposite. Don't make an image of me.
And
I
even
don't
the
want
prophecies
it.
of Jesus were straight up, he would not come of a desirable
Yeah.
stock. He would, people wouldn't just look at him and
He
think he
wasn't
was
appealing
attractive.
to the eye.
He was just a regular man.
Yeah.
Already mentioned the first part of this. Yeah, we've already quoted this, so I'm just gonna leave it up for a sec. You can. The last part, his birth.
Yeah.
The birth of.
Mother Nana was a virgin who conceived by putting a ripe almond or a pomegranate in her bosom. Indeed, the Phrygian
Cosmogony.
An almond.
Cosmogony.
An almond figured as the father of all things. But it also says Addis.
Which again is blasphemous because in Zechariah, Jesus is depicted as an almond tree.
Yes.
Moses and Aaron's staff were an almond branch. So again, we're stealing the imagery from God and blaspheming it.
So then it also says earlier, it says Addis was said to have been a young, fair shepherd or herdsman beloved by Cybele, the mother of the gods. So she's still mother over him. A great Asiatic goddess of fertility who had her chief home in Phrygia. Some held that Addis was her son. His birth, like that of many heroes, is said to have been miraculous. Interesting.
All the same story.
Yeah.
Mithraic religion proved a formidable rival to Christianity, combining, as it did, a solemn ritual with aspirations after moral purity and a hope of immortality. Indeed, the issue of the conflict between the two faiths appeared for a time to have hung in the balance. An instructive relic of the long struggle is preserved in our festival of Christmas, which the Church seems to have borrowed directly from its heathen rival. In the Julian calendar, the 25th of December was reckoned the winter solstice, and it was regarded as the nativity of the sun. So that's the major element. Every single one of these religions, whether it was specifically the 25th of December, the element was there was a spring and there was a winter festival. It was the spring equinox and the winter equinox, and that you cannot contest. You can argue with December 25th all day long.
It doesn't matter what day it is.
It doesn't matter. We're referring to, it's a solstice festival that's it's using black magic to try and bring back the sun.
Yeah. Now, the 25th of December was considered the winter solstice with Egypt, too.
Mm-hmm. It was either the 21st or the 25th, depending on the culture.
Or it was in Yule, it started the 21st and was a 12-day feast that ended the 1st of January. So it was either several days around December 21st, December 25th, or it was one of those. One of those.
Yeah, so the solstice element is what's important. You
Mhm.
look at any single religion. I mean, even the Masons, they have their rituals on the spring equinox
And the
and the
winter,
winter equinox. The Druids, winter
summer,
equinox,
or yeah,
summer
yep,
equinox. Sorry, spring equinox,
spring and
winter.
winter. Yeah,
Every single one is the same. And that, again, is a litmus test because
yep.
the biblical holidays don't revolve around the equinoxes.
Mhm.
It's the only religion known to man that is completely different.
Yeah. Finish reading that because this
Yes.
is really good.
So of the December 25th was reckoned the winter solstice, and it was regarded as the nativity of the sun because that was the rebirth when the days started getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. That was the day where it got to its shortest point, and it started getting longer after that point.
Mhm.
And they believed if they didn't do these rituals, it would continue to get shorter until they were left in complete darkness.
Yes.
So because the day begins to lengthen, and the power of the sun is to increase from that turning point of the year, the ritual of the Nativity, as it appears to have been celebrated in Syria and Egypt, was remarkable. The celebrants retired into certain inner shrines, from which at midnight they issued with a loud cry, "The Virgin is brought forth! The light is waxing!" The Egyptians even represented the newborn sun by the image of an infant, which on his birthday, the winter solstice, they brought forth and exhibited to his worshippers.
Oh my lord.
Now let
Oh
that
my.
sink in.
Well, wow.
As all the way back to ancient Egypt. So again, the Israelites were there. They saw this stuff. They
Yeah.
were part of this stuff. And this is one of the things that God was trying to extract from them and say, that's not, don't keep that part. I have my own stuff, and I'm going to show you.
So, I mean, you have in this statement too, you have three different cultures. You have Rome that's saying it's the nativity of the sun, and then in Syria and Egypt, the Egyptians represented the newborn sun by an image of an infant, which was on his birthday, the winter solstice. So it was also the birth of the sun.
And here's the infant.
Yes.
You can put Mary and Joseph on that, but it doesn't change the picture of the infant and the mother goddess, the moon, the horns, um, the the feathers, the snake.
Yeah.
I think that's a snake on his head too here, showing that he's the
Yeah,
son of
that's
the
interesting.
serpent. When Jesus castigated the rabbis, you are sons of the devil.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not
Son of
doing the works
vipers.
of my father, you're doing the works of the devil.
Yeah.
And they were leading people. I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying that um, everyone that is caught up in this or trained up in this is of the devil. Not saying that at all. I'm saying Jesus was calling out the rabbis specifically because they knew.
They knew.
They knew what they were doing, and they were leading people in evil.
We do not know.
We don't know.
The
We're
truth
learning.
has
We
been
are
hidden.
literal babies trying to figure out what is going on
Yeah.
in the world around us. We look around. We don't understand anything.
And Isaiah even says you were I feel like it's either Isaiah
Starting around Isaiah 48,
40,
it
yeah.
starts talking to newborn Israel, going, all right, your father and your mother died because of their sins. They were left in exile. Your baby now, this is why your ancestors were cut off from the covenant. Now, don't do that stuff, and we're going to make a covenant, and I'm going to lead you into the promised land. That's
Mm-hmm.
always been the lineup. So
Mm-hmm.
we've gone through the worst of it. We've gone through the death phase. Now it's time to resurrect and find out why we died,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can come back to life. Like the timeline of prophecy, we're in that time. On this, after 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will raise us up. We're in the raising up part of prophecy where he's reviving us, giving us breath again, and rising up based on that timeline from when Israel went into captivity.
Mm-hmm.
We're right there, and this is what needs to be done before we can actually be raised up.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Okay, continuing on from Frazer, my good friend. Sometimes the corn, and this is Old English, so the corn spirit is the wheat spirit. Any grain was called corn. He is conceived as a child who is separated from its mother by the stroke of a sickle. A sickle. End times
Yep.
imagery
Wheat and
again.
the tares. Sickle.
This last view appears in the Polish custom of calling out the man who cuts the last handful of grain. You have cut the navel string. In some districts of West Prussia, the figure made out of the last sheaf is called the bastard, and a boy is wrapped up in it. The woman who binds the last sheaf and represents the corn mother is told that she is about to be brought to bed. She cries like a woman in labor, and an old woman in the character of grandmother acts as midwife. At last a cry is raised that the child is born, whereupon the boy who is tied up in the sheaf whimpers and squalls like an infant. The grandmother wraps a sack, in imitation of swaddling bands, round the pretend baby, who is carried joyfully to the barn, lest he should catch cold in the open air. In other parts of North Germany, the last sheaf or the puppet made out of it is called the child. Super creepy stuff.
Well, did you get that? They're reenacting it. That's a reenactment.
Uh-huh.
That's baffling. And how many reenactments do we see of the Nativity? And it looks like just like that.
And we'll see that the imagery is going to tell on itself.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that.
Yes.
Just like the bowl imagery told on itself, when there's a spiritual contract where they have to show us what they're doing, but they don't have to explain it. Just like Jacob bought the birthright from Esau, he didn't have to explain that contract, what was going on. It was up to Esau to understand it. So Satan has to present the pictures. He doesn't have to teach us what they mean.
And he doesn't have to make it its authentic, disgusting self. He can make it palatable, which he has done.
He just has to show us what's happening in some way that is legible on a biblical contractual basis. And if he does that, then he has full right to take whatever falls into his basket. The inference, thus based on the resemblance of the customs, is confirmed by the following features in the legend and ritual of Adonis. His affinity with vegetation comes out at once in the common story of his birth. He was said to have been born from a myrrh tree, another blasphemous element, all over the place. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the three gifts that were brought to Jesus.
Interesting.
Which are what you embalm a king, or not embalm, anoint a king with. Sorry.
Wrong thing, completely.
Reverse. I might edit that part.
Okay, proceed.
His affinity with vegetation comes out at once in the common story, although it is true. They did embalm him with.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's both anointing and embalming. Anyway, I could get off on a rabbit trail.
That was good. I liked that.
He was said to have been born from a myrrh tree, the bark of which, bursting after a 10 months gestation, allowed the lovely infant to come forth. According to some, a boar rent the bark with his tusk. There's that boar again. You start to look for these images.
Yeah.
The boar, the tree, the sun. It'll come out everywhere. And so opened a passage for the babe. A faint rationalistic color was given to the legend by saying that his mother was a woman named Myrrh, who had been turned into a myrrh tree soon after she had conceived the child. The use of myrrh as incense at the festival of Adonis may have given rise to the fable. We have seen that incense was burnt at the corresponding Babylonian rites, just as it was burnt by the idolatrous Hebrews in honor of the Queen of Heaven.
The Queen of Heaven, Inanna, Ishtar.
All the archaeologists know what's going on.
Yep.
They don't play coy with it. It's right out there in the open. And the Bible says the same thing all through it. And we'll get into the passages in the Bible it's unbelievable. It's everywhere. But anyway, she was no other than Astarte. Again, the story that Adonis spent half, or according to others, a third of the year in the lower world and the rest of it in the upper. On one of the 5 days of Osiris, regarded as outside of the year of 12 months, the curse of the sun god did not rest, and accordingly Osiris was born on the first of them. At his nativity, a voice rang out proclaiming that the Lord of all had come into the world.
And here's a statuette of Osiris. This is 664 to 332 BC. He holds his shepherd's ankh, which we've discussed represents both kingship and divinity. He's
Shepherding the people. He's
shepherding.
leading. He has authority to lead and shepherd and teach the people.
Yes, and he has. So it's interesting that these hats, these crowns that the Egyptians wear, looks quite similar to Dagon. I don't know if there's a similarity.
There is.
But it looks very, and it obviously looks very similar to what
Your
the Pope
mind
wears.
doth not deceive you.
What the Pope wears the same.
Or your eye, sorry.
The Pope wears the same hat, crown, whatever you call it.
Right. Summary. We're pretty much done. In all the male deity stories, they all copy the true story of the birth, death, and resurrection of the Son of God. They all were born to a virgin, died on a tree, and rose from the dead in a blasphemic way. I don't know if that's a word, but it is now.
It is.
Many were young shepherds, just as our Messiah was born of a virgin, died on a cross, and rose from the dead, and is also known as the Good Shepherd. Also, a lot of the prophets he used were shepherds, Moses specifically. This concept is on both sides. David, Joseph.
Gideon.
Yeah. All over the place.
Yep.
Jacob.
Jacob.
Let's talk about Jacob. The only differences are the profanities that mock and blaspheme the true Son of God. All of these deities shared their lover as their mother, and many emasculated themselves under a tree. Both Asherah and the Tammuz figure combat the curses, but how does this relate to modern times, and specifically the last days? Dig deeper with us on the next video, part 3, and we're going to dig into the celebrations of man's fall in modern day, and we're going to go into the images and what they depict, each specific. So now that we've kind of gotten a broad understanding of what these pictures mean, now we can go the next level deeper and go, okay, again, if this all connects and lines up and is true, then the specific elements of these celebrations are also going to point to that moment of Adam and Eve's death. And these celebrations is where we get very controversial. Yes. So know that there goes my sound again.
We get controversial as if we haven't been controversial.
Yeah. But we're going to really start drawing conclusions that I know a lot of you people are already seeing. So, again, just ask questions. I'm trying to relay the questions that I have had, and I'm not here to give you answers. I'm here to...
Or tell you what to do.
Yeah, or tell you what to think, or tell you what to do. I'm here because I felt like... I knew way too much to not put it out there. And if I don't at least try to tell people what I know and what I perceive, then I'm part of the problem too. So my goal here is not to tell anybody what to think or what to judge or what to believe or what to do with their lives. It's merely to present what I've been shown and what I believe is the most important element of returning to our God. So we have, a collective decision to make, and the time of blissful ignorance is over. We're at the point where it's going to get us killed if we don't wake up and look around us. We've got the beast literally waiting to right on the door to start wiping people out. And it's a wake-up call.
Or to incorporate...
He's either going to kill us or he's going to lead us in his worship.
Yeah.
And I'd rather die.
Yeah.
So, but I'd rather not have to make that choice. God has promised the people who wake up and cleanse themselves and purify themselves will be led on his secret path. And that's what this is all going to lead into. There's a secret path of safety, the narrow road that Jesus talked about, and it's only for the people that cleanse themselves of this stuff while they have the chance. And there's redemption for absolutely anybody, but it gets a lot harder the longer it takes. If we get this figured out now and start moving down this road, it's going to be a lot less painful, and that's why I'm presenting this. It's to try to save as many of us as much pain as possible. And I'm going to leave it on the references if anybody wants to jot anything down. But thank you guys for sticking with us so far. We will have the next video up here probably tomorrow. I'm trying to blast these out so that people have as much time to process and think and cross-reference and scream at me as possible before Christmas.
Scream at us.
Like, I'll take it. Throw rocks. Like, it's fine. This isn't fun information, and it's perfectly normal to be upset and angry. And I'm not here to attack anybody.
And you should be angry because we have all been deceived.
Yeah, we're all the victims.
Yes.
We, especially the people, we didn't make the choice to do what is going on.
This was
Our
inherited.
ancestors. There's a prophecy. In Jeremiah, I believe it is,
Truly
where
our
God says,
inherited lives.
in that last day, Ephraim will wake up, and America specifically has a lot of Ephraim in it. I'll get into that in another video. There's tons of evidence that a lot of the lost tribes of Israel ended up getting siphoned to America. Even the Jews, the rabbis say that. So essentially, these prophecies about Ephraim waking up in the last days, it's us. It's here. So there's a prophecy that says Ephraim will say, "What more have I to do with idols? Surely our fathers have inherited lies." So when we wake up and go, you know what? We don't need to keep doing this stuff anymore. It's all a lie, and it's okay.
Affliction. It brings nothing but curse and affliction over you and your family.
Yeah.
So let's find freedom and revival. When have we seen revival?
We don't see revival until we cleanse ourselves. Cleanse our
need it.
houses, cleanse our minds, cleanse our spirit, and look around us with these eyes. When Jesus, one of his first miracles was he opened the eyes of the man who had been born blind. We are that man that's been born blind.
Amen.
And then immediately after that, he went into the temple and took whips and beat the money changers and turned over the tables and threw their god of Mammon all over the ground and said, "Stop turning this temple into a market." And then immediately after that, after he cleanses the temple, he goes and he forgives an adulterous woman. That's also us.
Yeah.
We are all three of those pictures, and we're at the phase where Jesus is about to start going through and opening our eyes, cleansing our temples, and then pardoning of us of our adultery and saying, "Go sin no more. You're forgiven." That's all we can ask for. So I hope you'll bear with us.
On that note, that's a great
Yeah.
great note to end.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Think of revival. Think of the end, the light at the end of the tunnel.
This should have a positive spin. The whole point of this is to try to bring life in a world of death and darkness. You have to identify the death to see the life. So thank you guys for listening. We will see you guys soon.